And welcome back. It's TYT The Conversation, and it is also Adrienne Lawrence. And this time I have for you the congressional candidate for Illinois 7th District and an anti-gun violence advocate, that is Kina Collins. Thanks for joining us, Kina.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, Kina, so you are essentially in these streets doing the hard work as a lifelong activist, also being that nationally recognized gun violence prevention expert and healthcare advocate. And so you are running for your congressional district. What made you want to go ahead and take this step from activist to member of Congress?
Yeah, Congressman Davis has been my congressman since I was literally 6 years old. This is a district that I was born and raised in. And like many Black Chicagoans, my grandparents came from the South to the North and settled on the West Side of Chicago. And we've been in this district ever since. Congressman Davis, 25 years ago when he came in, had some progressive values. And over those 25 years, we've seen certain neighborhoods flourish and other ones be left behind. Congressman Davis is the third most corporate funded Democrat in the House right now. And while everyone has made a conversation out of making Chicago a political punching bag around gun violence, they're not talking to the everyday working class people who live in these communities. So I'm running to represent them and to change this narrative, but also say that it's time to elect a representative who's unbought and unbossed.
Yeah, I think that says a lot. The fact that there are too many people out there who are supposed to be lawmakers and leaders, but are essentially filling their coffers with funding from various sources. And so when it comes to work that you want to do, can you share with our viewers kind of what your focal points are?
Yeah, of course, my background is as a gun violence prevention advocate, and I think that we need to tackle that a number of ways. One, we need to understand that poverty is the root cause of a lot of this violence that are happening in these communities. And so having economic development is going to be a cornerstone for how we drive down a lot of this crime that we're seeing. But we also need to make sure that we're funding groups that are boots on the ground fighting against this violence in our neighborhoods and making sure that they're getting the federal resources that they need. And finally, on the federal level, we need to start holding these wealthy gun manufacturers and gun shops accountable. Nearly 60% of all guns that are basically recovered by Chicago Police Department are not even from Illinois. They're from Wisconsin, Indiana, and Mississippi. And so we need to push back on this narrative that people don't care about this violence in our district and make sure that we're holding folks accountable. But really the impetus for why I decided to run was healthcare. I spent my time as a national organizer organizing 20,000 doctors and medical students around single payer Medicare for all. And Congressman Davis has been funded by big pharmaceutical and private insurance companies. And so when we talk about the life expectancy gap in the Illinois 7 and basically people all across this country getting access to healthcare through a global health pandemic, we need to make sure that we're saying boldly that Medicare for all is the way that we get there.
Yes, and I think that's something that is echoed across the country if only we can get lawmakers on board. And so it sounds like in getting you in that position that there would be definitely hope in pushing that in the direction that would serve us all. And so I also know that you have a proven track record of policymaking, also coalition building. And so can you talk a little bit about your work and your background in that arena?
Yeah, so my first piece of legislation happened after, I was organizing on the ground around Laquan McDonald. I realized that the power wasn't just on the front lines of those protests, it was in the public policy room. And so in 2017, I wrote my first piece of civil rights legislation called the Illinois Council on Women and Girls Act, which was a direct response to Donald Trump eliminating the White House Council on Women and Girls. And essentially, they would advise the governor and state lawmakers on anything that directly impacts us and funding that impacts us. The caveat was that my legislation emphasized protecting reproductive health care and centering the voices of women of color and trans and non-binary folks as well. And it was the first time that something like that was written. We basically took on the Illinois GOP. I won, they lost, and a Republican governor was forced to sign all of that into law. Reproductive health care, LGBTQ rights, closing the pay wage equity gap, and creating this council that serves as an accountability metric. And so it was a great organizing victory. I traveled to 68 counties out of 102 in the state of Illinois, building this coalition. And like I said, we ended up winning.
And in that, you had mentioned that you had worked in terms of bringing attention to the death and murder of Laquan McDonald, that 17-year-old boy who was murdered by Jason Van Dyke, who was an officer. And I know you had organized the protest in the aftermath of his murder. And so I guess from that experience, which was several years definitely before this recent uprising, what is something that you learned from that in terms of what you can bring essentially your district moving forward?
My district is a plurality African-American district. It's a super majority minority district. And really, I think we have to grapple with the question here in America about why does it require a viral consumption of Black suffering and outrage in order to embarrass and shame the criminal injustice system into doing something and holding folks accountable when excessive force is used by police officers. What I learned is that a lot of the elected officials on the ground in Chicago refused to speak out against Officer Van Dyke, even though he murdered, and then the city concealed the murder of Laquan McDonald for 400 days. And you ask the question why? It's because they were getting campaign donations from the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police. And so, what I'm bringing as the next representative for the Illinois 7 is to say, not only are we not going to be influenced by dark money in my campaign, but we're centering all of our policies on social, racial, and economic equity and justice. And so that means for all of us, when you center the voices of working class people, you lift up the entire district. And so I learned to be very bold on those front lines. I learned that our lives do matter. And then I also learned a lot of our politicians could get a lot of this done, but they don't have the political courage or will to do it. So.
And it seems that you've definitely had the courage to speak out, and that Officer Van Dyke is set to be released tomorrow after serving just about over 3 years on a near 7-year sentence for second-degree murder and 16 counts of aggravated battery. Have there been any developments in terms of maybe calling out what more can be done?
We've called on our U.S. Senators, Tammy Duckworth and Dick Durbin, to continue to push for federal charges and civil rights violations to be filed against Jason Van Dyke. But most importantly, we need to codify this on the national level. Why is it that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act hasn't been passed? The Breathe Act, the Mental Health Justice Act hasn't been passed. There are several ways that we could be codifying and protecting the people in this country. And Democrats were elected on a mandate to do that after the murder of George Floyd. And we've seen our party leadership just drag their feet on this issue. It is unacceptable. And, all I have to say about that is that the primaries are coming and people are coming for these seats. And so, I think this is a learning moment for us, that there are organizing victories that we can celebrate, but that we can't just let up because we have, a House, a Senate, and a presidency that is Democrat run.
Absolutely. The need to continue to do more and to continue to push back seems ever present in especially the conversations we are having and getting some movement and some change. And so if you were to be elected, what do you think would be the first thing you'd do?
Well, the first thing that we have to tackle, because Illinois 7 actually has the largest life expectancy gap in the nation. If you live in the downtown portion of the city of Chicago, you live to the age of 90. If you drive a 30-minute car ride to the south side in the Inglewood community, your life expectancy drops to 60. So it's a 30-minute life expectancy gap. Immediately, we need to put together a task force on the ground in the Illinois 7 to make the case to fight for these federal dollars and resources for the people in the district. But legislatively, when I get to Congress, I want to repeal the ability for gun manufacturers to not be sued. I think that they are negligent in a lot of the crimes that happen with guns in our country, and they are not being held accountable. And so we need to make sure that we're codifying in law, once again, the ability for them to have an accountability metric.
And so in terms of that life expectancy and that disparity there, if he were to get the federal dollars, would it be largely dedicated, do you think, toward the gun violence issue? Is that a main cause? Or are we looking at environmental racism? What are we looking at as the main kind of causes for this disparity?
It's all of the above, right? It's the fact that there are children in my district who have never seen a functioning grocery store. You know what I'm saying? So we have to get grocery stores in the Illinois 7, but it's all of the above. It's eradicating environmental racism. It's making sure that we push for primary care in our district and people have full access to that. It's the ability for people to have affordable and comfortable housing and safe housing. Housing is the #1 social determinant of health. So this task force that we hope to put together in the first 100 days will be, fitted with experts in all of those areas to make sure that we're allocating the resources properly to chip away at that 30-year gap.
Yeah, absolutely, because that definitely sounds like it is making a monumental difference in terms of serving constituents and also ensuring that they remain alive, essentially to enjoy this life. And that's a very powerful thing that you are working to do. And I really, really appreciate all of your work. And so if people want to support your campaign, if they want to know more about you, to follow you on your journey, where can they find more information about you and your congressional run?
Yeah, so they can go to KinaCollins.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Kina Collins IL, which is just the acronym for Illinois, or you can follow us on Instagram at Kina, the #4 Congress. Please follow along, send a donation in. We're out fundraising the incumbent right now, which has never happened really in a primary against him. And we need to keep that momentum going. So please send in donations, sign up to Phone Bank, do all the things to help us get across the finish line.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kina, for joining us. That's Kina Collins, congressional candidate for Illinois 7th District and an anti-gun violence advocate. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.